Hi and welcome to I Hate Drums. This is lesson 14 of the beginner video course. Today we're going to be focusing on the toms. Now if you've watched lesson 2, which introduced the drum kit and its notes, you'll already know where these toms sit, but I will go over that again. But what we're going to do today is actually use some of the rhythms that we've already learned and note values from lesson 6, where we learned quarter notes, eighth notes and 16th notes, and from lesson 13, the last lesson, where we looked at 16th note variations. We're going to use those with the toms to make what we call drum fills. Now, you should know what a fill is because you'll have probably heard it in music many times, but usually it comes at the end of a section and follows a bunch of grooves. So you might have like 3 bars or 7 bars of a groove, and then at the very end of a section you get a big thing around the toms, and that bit there is a drum fill. So today we're going to be doing a groove, a nice simple groove, and then a drum fill. And we're going to look at 6 different fills today. So the 3 drums that we're adding are the high tom, which is this one here, the mid tom, which I don't have, we'll get to that in a second, and the floor tom, which is the big one behind me here. So just to recap what I went over in lesson 2, the high tom, the note for the high tom, sits in the top space. So within those 5 lines of the musical stave, the very top space is where the high tom lives. And it's the highest drum. So the highest drum has the highest dot. Now the cymbals are higher and the notes of the cymbals are higher, but in terms of drums, the high tom is the highest one. Now the mid tom, the phantom mid tom, normally you would have a high tom. I say normally. Some kits have a high tom and a mid tom, like this picture here, and that's often attached to the bass drum via what we call a tom arm or a bracket. My bass drum doesn't even have a hole in it, so I can't mount toms to my bass drum. But there's a strong chance that some of you out there will have 2 toms here. So we're going to include the mid tom in these exercises. If you don't have a mid tom, and that'll be a lot of you as well, like myself here, I don't have a mid tom, what I'm going to suggest you do is just play the snare drum instead. So for some of the exercises, they might be going around the kit, like snare drum, high tom, mid tom, floor tom. If you don't have the mid tom, you just do snare drum, high tom, snare drum, floor tom. But we'll get to that as we go. Now the note for the mid tom has a line going through the middle. So mid tom, line through the middle. So that's the only drum that's got the line running through the middle. And then the floor tom behind me here, the T-towel is optional. The note for this one is in the second space. Now, this is the second biggest drum on the kit, so that's one way you can remember that note. It's in the second space. So we're going to work through these 6 fills on the kit. So get yourself comfortable and let's get started. Let's get stuck into the first fill. This one's quite straightforward. We're going with a nice 8th note rhythm just around the drums. Now, the fill that we have here is going to be snare, snare, high tom, mid tom, mid tom, floor tom, floor tom. As I mentioned earlier, if you don't have a mid tom like myself, and that'll be quite a lot of you, when you get to those mid tom hits, just return to the snare. So for that version, it's going to be snare, snare, high, high, snare, snare, floor, floor. Now, the important thing with this particular fill is that we're playing 8th notes, and we're also playing 8th notes on the hi-hat. So for this first fill, the speed that you're playing the hi-hat is the same speed you're going to be playing this fill. And we're going to be doing it, as always, at 60. So I'll play it through first of all, and then we'll give it a try together. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... So again, if you have the mid tom, you go snare, snare, high, high, mid, mid, floor, floor. So let's give it a try, twice around. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... That's your first fill. Okay, fill 2, we have snare, snare, and then after that, what are those 2 drums? bass, bass. When you first start doing fills that include the toms, it becomes a bit tempting to see toms everywhere. But don't forget the snare drum and the bass drum can also be part of these fills as well. So don't just assume it's a tom when you get used to reading these fills. So that's the first half. Snare, snare, bass, bass. And then again, we're playing eighth notes there. So we're still the same speed as the hi-hats up to that point. And then we have high tom, 3E and A. So we're playing 16th notes. And then mid tom, 4E and A. So again, I'm just going to go back to the snare drum for that mid tom hit. You could, in this case, go to the floor tom because there's no floor tom in the fill, but just to keep things kind of consistent, we'll go back to the snare if you don't have a mid tom. I'll play it through first of all so you can have a listen, and then we'll give it a try a couple of times around. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. You ready? Twice around. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. That's the second fill. Just like with the grooves, it's really important that you can actually repeat them again and again, because that's going to help you develop control with them and develop your understanding of them as well. Fill 3. Rhythmically, this one's pretty straightforward, but it's changing more regularly. We've got 4 16th notes, 1 E and A, and then 2 and, so 2 8th notes, and then 3 E and A, 4 and. So 1 E and A, 2 and, 3 E and A, 4 and. So all those exercises where we've been working from 8th notes to 16th notes to quarter notes, changing rates, it's starting to be useful now. So in terms of the drums, we've got 1 E and A on the snare drum, 2 and on the high tom, 3 E and A on the mid tom. I'll be going back to the snare, you can too, and then 4 and on the floor tom. So I'll play it through, have a listen, and then we'll try it twice. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. You ready? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Fourth fill. Now this one's slightly different in terms of which drums we're using. Up until now, all the fills have kind of gone in a clockwise direction around the kit, if you've got a mid-tom. This one isn't starting on a snare drum. The first drum here is actually the high tom, and we've got 1 E and on the high tom, and then it's going across, so kind of doing this kind of diagonal to the floor tom, where we've got 2 E and then we've got 3 and back on the snare, and then the last hit, beat 4, is a mid-tom. Again, I'll be playing that on the snare, you can too. I'll play through it, have a listen, and then we'll go for it twice through. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, you ready? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now there's a slight chance that a few of you might have rushed into the second kind of loop of it. Remember that the last hit within the fill is beat 4, but there's still the space for the and after it. So you've got 1 E and, 2 E and, 3 and 4 and then back into the groove. Okay, we're on to the fifth fill now. This one is actually rhythmically, it's still not too bad. We've got 1E and 2E and 3E and a 4E and. The real challenge here is the fact that we're changing drums pretty quickly. We're not just kind of sticking to one drum for one kind of cluster of rhythm. So like in the last fill we had 1E and that was all on one drum. This time we've got 1E and across two drums. So we've got snare, snare, high, 1E and then the next group we've got 2E and, so snare, snare, floor, and then for 3E and a 4E and we're going around the kit, 3E and a 4E and. Again, if you don't have the mid-tom, you're going to be 3E and a 4E and. So snare, snare, high, high, snare, snare, floor, floor. But if you do have the mid-tom, you should use it. So that would be snare, snare, high, high, mid, mid, floor, floor. Again, I'll play it around once, have a listen, and then we'll try it twice. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. You ready? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Just a little note on the sticking again. As I mentioned within lesson 13, the last lesson, the sticking that you're playing within these rhythms is really important once you start putting it around the kit, especially with the floor tom. Those last two hits, we're finishing with 40 and a. So make sure you are playing that last group of 40 and a, right, left. Because again, as I mentioned in the last lesson, that means you're finishing on the floor tom with the left hand, and that gives you a bit more time to get back to the hi-hat. If you're finishing on a right hand on the floor tom, and then the next hit is a hi-hat, you're going to be in trouble. So make sure you get that. On to the final fill for today. This one is a little bit different. We've actually got an 8th note rest in this one. So back when we looked at some rests, we had some different note value rests. We had the quarter note rest, 8th note rest, and the 16th note rest. This is an 8th note rest. So it's actually in the position of beat 2. And then after it, we've got that note with the tail. That's the 8th note. That particular note is an and. So that's the and of 2. We've also got a different rhythm at the very beginning. We don't have 1E and here. We've got, if you remember from the last lesson, 1 and a. Let's just go through the rhythm first of all. We've got 1 and a, and then a rest on 2, a hit on the and. So that's going to be 1 and 2 and then 3 with a gap for the and of 3, don't forget. This is a quarter note. And then finishing with 4E and. So I'll just play the rhythm all on the snare drum, just so you can get a feel for that first of all. 3 and 4 and. So there's a couple of bits of space within that. You've got space where the rest is on beat 2, and then you've also got space after beat 3, because that quarter note's taken up the whole beat. So you've got space where the and 3 is. So it can really help to count all of the 8th notes for those spaces as you're going through. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4E and. So now for the drums. The first group, the 1 and that's on the snare drum. 2 is the rest, and the and of 2 is the mid tom. So I'll be playing a snare drum for that one. Beat 3 is the floor tom, and then the last group, 4E and, that's the high tom. So I'll play it through once, have a listen, and then we'll try it twice. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. You ready? Here we go. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And that's just 6 fills. Now don't forget, there's something else you need to do in your practice with these 6 fills. Once you can loop them individually, don't forget to see if you can work from one into the next, into the next, into the next. And I'll make all 6 available for download so that you can use that in your own practice time. That's 6 different fills that we've covered, and hopefully you can see the potential within different drums and different rhythms. You could take one rhythm and play it in a bunch of different ways just by selecting different drums. Likewise, you could pick one drum but play many, many different rhythms on that one drum. And when you combine those 2 elements, you've got kind of an endless amount of options to choose from, which can sometimes be a bit overwhelming. If you do find yourself coming up with your own ideas, but you're starting to get a bit kind of stuck as to what to choose from, just limit your options. So instead of going for all of the drums all at once, just pick 2 and see what you can come up with those 2 drums, like a snare drum and a floor tom. If you're struggling to come up with different rhythmic ideas, maybe just stick to one drum, because that's going to force you to think outside the box a little bit. Whereas if you use all the drums, all the toms and the snare drum and the bass drum, you might find that your ideas kind of get stuck in a bit of a rut. Whereas when you're on one drum, to be more creative, you're going to have to think of some different rhythms. And from that point, you can then spread those different rhythms across the kit. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. The toms are going to be really important for the next lesson because we're actually going to start looking at a new song which features toms and fills very heavily. So, until next time, enjoy.